Okay, so we're going to go over orienting joints. There's a few things I'd like to cover in regards to orienting joints. First of all, what they are. And so let's describe that first. And if I select a bone, I'm going to actually hide meshes, so we don't need to see it, the mesh for now. If I select this bone, you'll see in the center of it this blue, red, and green line. That's the orientation of that joint. And so if let's do this. I'm just doing this so that I can frame it. Okay. Okay, so there's that blue, green, and red line. Now, what's going to happen, and this is how it should be interpreted, is if I want to rotate around, if I rotate an X, that's the red line, right? And so that's going to rotate this way, or this way, which is going to spin the arm in place. Okay? If I rotate in Y, it's rotating it this way, because there's my green line. It's going to rotate it this direction. Okay? And then if I want to rotate in X, this is the way it will rotate, around the X-axis. So it's as if you're taking this line and spinning it in place for the different axes. So we can alter this, but by default, Maya is going to try to orient each joint so that X points to its child. So the child joint. So you'll see that this right here is pointing straight down the bone to this child. And that's good. That's almost always what you want. Now these other two axes, the Z and the Y, we want to orient those also so that they make sense to the rotation of our character. So typically, if there's a couple different ways to do that, and that's what I'd like to cover now. So we can go to the joint menu, or actually skeleton, sorry. Orient joint, the option box, and we've got our joint orient tool. And the primary axis is X. That's the one that points down the chain. You can change that if you want to. I don't recommend it, but you could. The secondary axis is Y. And on this shoulder joint, the green handle, right? And the secondary axis world orientation. So what this is always a confusing concept for students. But what this is that if you take your scene orientation, so this little cursor down here in the bottom left of the viewport, we have the X, Y, and Z. Y is pointing up, because that's up in our scene. Well, the secondary world axis orientation is we're saying use Y in a positive direction. So we got Y selected in the positive direction. And then we're telling this secondary axis to try to line up with this positive Y axis. So the secondary axis is Y, and it's going to try to match the world's y-axis. That's what that means. So if you orient joint to world, it just deactivates all the important options. And if I click apply, it makes it match this axis, right? So like if I move it down here, it matches that. So that's not what we want. We'll have to take a look at it. Okay, so I don't want to do that, and it only works on selected joints. Now I should mention while I'm on it that if I select this joint, it looks like all of these are selected. That's not true. They only look like they're selected because it's a hierarchical relationship. These children belong to this joint. So it's only going to orient this joint only, unless I have this orient children of selected joint selected. If I do that, it's going to reorient the joint I have selected and all of its children. So I'm going to reorient this, and this time I'm going to say X should point in the positive Y direction. So click apply, and it did the best it could. Now the reason it only did the best it could is because it has, the primary axis has to point to the child joint. That's an absolute must for this tool anyway. Okay, and so Y is actually what we want, and I'm going to change my primary axis to X again and click apply. And now we're back to where it was, that it had already done that by default. So let's say that's not exactly how I want it though. So what can I do? Well, if I go to component mode and turn on the question mark to show miscellaneous components, then it shows that joint orientation, prettier version of it even. And you can select that. And then if you can go to your rotate tool, and as long as you're not in gimbal mode for the rotate, then you can alter that. And you can reorient the joint manually. Okay, if you're in gimbal mode, it's not going to work. It just doesn't know what to do with it, because gimbal mode is based off of the joint orientation. Okay, so that's one way to edit it, and not a very precise way. So here's another way that we could alter it. Now, I haven't created yet. So there's a little mouse script, and with that selected, I can say rotate. And if you always want to rotate only in the axis that points down chain or to the child. And so in this case, it's the x-axis. So we're only going to rotate in x. And typically, I make a few of these. So and then I want to put -R, if I remember correctly, for relative. And then we're going to rotate in x by 1 degree. And then space, because we have to give it an x, y, and z rotation. So 1 in x, 0 for y, 0 for z, and semicolon. I pressed enter, and then it did it. It just rotated it ever so slightly. Now that's really important. to be able to do that